and welcome to Autology, the weekly podcast that brings you the latest on automotive technology. This week's episode is called National Targets but Local Needs, how to establish what EV charging infrastructure is really needed. And you're here with me, Anna Büttner, and Claudia Vittori, Senior Research Analyst e-Mobility at IHS Markit, alongside Tanya Lincoln, Consulting Executive Director at IHS Markit. Hello to you both, and thank you for joining this week's episode of Autology.
Hi all, thanks.
Hello, hi, and thanks for having me.
So let's talk about what's needed to establish the right EV charging infrastructure globally, nationally, but also locally. And the first question that I really have is the classic chicken and egg question. And what I mean by that is, how is the charging infrastructure deployment progressing relative to EV market adoption?
Anna, maybe I can go first. As a team, we do forecast the future of charging infrastructure at a national level, international national level. And of course, over the next 10 years, we are now expecting a steep increase of charging infrastructure deployment. The number of installations will grow exponentially over the next years, and especially into the domestic landscape. Especially the domestic landscape is probably where the infrastructure will grow the most, because the overall is probably the one still requiring in the future. We are expecting a market growing up to more than 50 million of stations installed by 2030, with Europe and China probably leading the way of the deployment with more than 70% of share. And on top of the domestic installation, the public and semi-public will still remain an important piece of the puzzle. We are forecasting more than 12 million of stations installed by 2030. And these gives just to give you a bit understanding on how the market is going to grow over the next years. And we are still defining the charging infrastructure as a basic element for the electric vehicles deployment over the next 10 years.
Yeah, I think, Claudia, you're quite right. I mean, we see a steep adoption curve and a steep increase of charging infrastructure, both domestic and public. And rollout is progressing quite well in many countries at a national scale. I just would like to add and emphasize really that we need to look at the regional and local level if we really want to assess infrastructure deployment needs. And we do indeed see congestion and bottlenecks for public infrastructure in particular in certain geographic areas. So when we look at the United States, for an example, at the state level, non-surprisingly, we see states such as California with its very high EV adoption reaching a level of congestion in charging infrastructure already today. But also other states, maybe a little more surprisingly, such as Washington, Oregon, or Illinois, have very unfavorable ratios of EVs per public charger, and will see congestion very shortly as EV adoption continues. We're also looking at some of our European markets at the more city level. Certain areas in Berlin, for example, are showing 60% of charging station utilization rate, which poses another question to me, which is 100% utilization rate in public charging infrastructure at all attainable? Because most customers do not want to plug in their vehicles at 2 a.m. So 60% overall utilization basically indicates that those stations are already full during the main charging times. And that really has to be considered as we talk about rollout, not only at the national scale, but also the regional influence.
Okay, so definitely still some hurdles to overcome. Maybe that's a good time to talk about which major factors influence infrastructure deployment. Claudio, could you maybe share your perspective on this? And then Tanya, feel free to chime in after.
Yeah, of course. I'm sure that Tanya has a really great view on the local side of business. But let me give you first maybe our outlook for the future, how we are framing a bit the charging infrastructure topic in our data, in our forecast, in our view, in our intelligence of the market. I mean, as we said above, I mean, the charging infrastructure, the domestic charging infrastructure is today the most important piece of charging, because more than 80-90% of charging events are happening at home or are overnight chargings. And we are expecting the same over the next 10 years, with the domestic remaining the most important piece of the puzzle, as I said. And if we move outside the range of the domestic, there are two other elements that are still competing to be part of the charge infrastructure. We do see an infrastructure belongings, the public belongings, the activities, the business activities, and these are the ones to be deployed in public and semi-public domain. We do not see a strong business case there. That's one of the reasons why we do see this market probably fulfilled by local utilities or the public bodies, and to offer, pretty well-served area for all the EV drivers. And the other section is about the DC, so the I-powered charging stations. And this is where effectively today the business model is concrete, where there is a business model, especially in certain area where a lot of electric vehicles are concentrated. Over the next 10 years, this is probably the place or the area of business where the amount of revenue and the business remain and will increase. This is where we see a lot of companies jumping in and deploying their own business model in effectively not just in a national level, but cross-regional, and perhaps applying the same business model in different geographical area like North America, Europe, and China. But Daniel, I leave to you for further details on that.
Yeah. I agree with you, Claudia, on the point that domestic and workplace charging is probably the most relevant mean of charging overall, and will continue to be or even grow. But locally, we also need to be focusing on the public charging infrastructure needs as well. And their influential factors are obviously the local housing mix and home ownership rates still. I mean, we do see more infrastructure being built in multi-story apartment housing. We do see more investments, but still not every driver living in the city center has access to private home charging. So public charging is absolutely critical for those. And in addition, let's not forget about the importance of destination charging. Areas with high traffic, parking hotspots such as shopping malls, retail parks, restaurants, will still have a need for destination charging. Even for those consumers who do have home charging access and home charging availability, knowing where to charge at their destination goes a very long way for their EV adoption and against the range anxiety. So let's not underestimate that. And luckily, we can leverage big data sets such as connected vehicle tracking data to really understand consumer driving pattern, where they are parked outside the residential garages. And we can use those data analytics to more effectively plan charging infrastructure needs. So we should leverage that data.
Okay, yes, very good. So yeah, pretty clear that these factors you mentioned play a very important role here. What is the current model for local public infrastructure rollout then? And how do you think this business model is going to evolve?
That's a very good question. Until now, most of the public infrastructure rollout has been pretty much reactive to early adopter consumer needs, and in certain areas to legislation. So as a result, we basically look at a very scattered landscape today with various different operators, scattered locations throughout an area, different membership programs, etc., which all makes it highly complex for consumers. But the biggest challenge of all, and in terms of the current business model, is utilization rates. Many of the public stations, and especially AC stations, still remain underutilized and are not very profitable for the operators. So I think something has to change going forward. And what I believe we will probably see is a more planned and structured approach, which I believe is likely going to be a hub and spoke model, where we can expect larger fast charging hubs. So like the DC charging centers operated by larger investors and basically replacing the traditional gas station. Those can be complemented by smaller AC and DC station in destinations with high parking density or a local need. But those like fast charging hubs that I referenced here, I think those will be primarily located at the major traffic intersections where they can scale, where they get high utilization rates, where they can also leverage advanced technologies such as high voltage chargers with battery storage solutions. Peak load shaving is a big concern for most of those operators. So that's all issues that are better addressed and provide better scalability in such a hub and spoke model compared to individual stations as we primarily see them today.
Okay, thanks, Tanya, on that, on your view on this. And Claudio, on a broader perspective, in your opinion, what is the future business model likely going to be?
Well, I totally agree with Tanya, especially about the DC portion about business. As I briefly said before, the DC section of business is where we do see the value, or we do see the business case in the future. And we are now experiencing a market where emerging company as well as established company into, I don't know, manufacturer of stations or energy utilities are now going to the business of offering the service of charging infrastructure. And of course, as I said, the service means predominantly offering a really charging session in a really compressed time. So now, the faster you are, the better it is for the user. And this is where we see the market of growing in terms of competition, offering higher power, and so shortening the time of charging. And so in this case, the business model is there because you are not simply offering a charging, you are offering a service, an efficient service to client. And that's why a lot of companies are entering into the business, and there is probably a tendency of being offering a service which is cross-domain, cross-nation, because in most of the cases, Tanya said, this is part of of a long trip, long journey where the users can get a charging station in a specific nodes of the European or regional infrastructure. The other important thing for us is, again, connected to the domestic installation. For now, domestic is purely the most easy way to charge, to get your car charged overnight. Per our analysis on the component side, on the vehicle side, we are expecting that by 2030, more than 50% of vehicles will be effectively vehicle to grid ready. So it means that, especially into the AC side of the business, they will be capable of putting battery energy to the home or to additional battery, enabling effectively the vehicle to grid or the vehicle to home capability. This is where we do see in the future a possible new business case. And of course, in this aspect, the utilities are probably the ones best positioned because they are already operating the energy flows into the house. It will be just a matter of changing protocols, changing normatives, and important portion of business.
Okay, thank you for your take on this. And just before we wrap up today's episode, it would be interesting to know your opinion on two new trends on charging, battery swapping and wireless charging. Do you guys think that these will really end the need for current infrastructure technology? Maybe Tanya, you could go first.
Yeah, from my perspective, I think longer term, those technologies will certainly pick up market share. But I think there's still a need for public destination charging today and into the foreseeable future. And I think so because I believe that retailers are not likely investing in those new technologies in the short term due to the initial cost and the complexity of installation that would be required.
Let me add, Anna. I agree. Let's say these two technologies are emerging to the market, and this is something that is not gonna happen tomorrow, perhaps, because there are still some technical constraints on the development of new technologies. Some of the OEMs are already, engaging themselves with the wireless charging technology. White Tricity is operating in a large scale or on, promoting that technology. In 2030, or let's say in the second decade of the second half of the decade, we are forecasting an increase in this technological development. And especially in the wireless charging side, it's something that it's probably starting first with fleets, and for example, maybe widely applied for taxis, for example, first, or in certain areas, certain regions like China is already testing some of the dynamic wireless charging capability in some major roads. But then gradually probably increasing towards other technology, because there is some, of course, the fact that you don't have to is again, something that goes in the direction of satisfying the final users. So apart from the technical constraints and costs, there are no reason of not having additional benefit for the users. About battery swapping, for now, our view about the future, and I'm still talking until 2030, so the next 10 years or so, we do see this technology development really connected to the OEM decision, because there are some technical reason why you should be ready. You should be the first one deciding on how to apply, and if applying or not, your battery swapping technology to your vehicles. So it's really hard to forecast a future or the near future, where a third party can put in place an infrastructure to serve battery swapping cross brands. So we do see some cases like NIO operating not just in China, maybe exporting in other regions, but still related to the brand capability of offering the service.
All right, great. Thank you both so much for sharing your knowledge and insights on this important topic. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. A big thank you to you both for joining Atology.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you all.
And thank you to all you listeners for tuning in as well. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode at our atology@ihs.market.com email, and you can find out much more at autotechinsight.ihsmarket.com. Don't forget to hit all the subscribe, follow, and like buttons to stay on track with the latest Atology podcasts. And we look forward to you joining us again in the next episode. Bye for now.